Question number one is super simple. So during your time at university, your career, obviously you were not only president, but also deputy of several communities, several major departments of Cambridge. Can you please tell me what impacts had on your mental health, and how did you implement this, if you did, into helping student union better their resources for students as a whole?
Yeah, so if I think back to my sort of where I started in kind of student representation and then right to my work today, I think if you speak to lots of students and speak to lots of people who end up in student representation, often it's as a result of their own personal experiences that they end up in those roles. And sometimes they can be negative experiences, which they then end up advocating on behalf of others so that they don't end up in those similar situations. I think for me, there was certainly a bit of that going to university which wasn't particularly diverse, and ending up focusing on areas such as tackling racism, reducing the BME attainment gap, and areas like that. Part of that came from what I studied at university in terms of tackling race and racism, and others, and other areas just came from wanting to make sure that students' voices were heard. So, those are big topics. They're personal, and that means that ultimately you do bring a lot of yourself to that. I think that's a good thing. It means that you end up being a lot more passionate about it. When things get difficult, it keeps you going.
Yeah.
But it is a much more involved situation, and that can take a toll on you personally, particularly when things don't go well.
That's right.
And I think for me, the key was just making sure that you were constantly checking in with people, that you had a really good supportive group around you. None of the projects that I was involved in, I did on my own. I always made sure to be surrounded by people who kind of had your back and you had theirs. And I think that's, on reflection, that's the sort of thing that keeps you going, particularly when things are more challenging.
Of course, yeah, that makes sense. So you would cite like teamwork and personal experience, and motivation and passion to actually help you implement certain things you did at your time at university. Like, you think those are the key points that really effectively that really brought you through to achieving what you did, which I think is really important to note that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I look back, some of the more challenging times when things weren't going particularly well, being able to have a group that was supporting you on it to really take you through that was so important.
Of course, yeah. Those are very transferable skills, and it's very buzzwordy thing to say, but I think just having that teamwork not only helps you in helping implement things that for greater good, but also you really learn from teamwork. It's something that this is good. I can use this wherever I go, because communication, working with others, is something that you need as a person to navigate anything, and not just mental health, but especially anything that has to do with your own well-being. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Question number two is, so in your thesis, which I looked up because I was trying to get a little research done, you spoke about institutional racism, especially at Oxbridge colleges and unis as well. And so I understand that's a burden that everyone deals with. Obviously, not everyone has racism or ever will, and that's obviously a great thing. But do you think any of the experiences that you had affected your education, in a very personal way? And if so, how did you deal with that? And what advice can you give myself as a person of color at uni who's having to not only deal with assignments and pressure, but also microaggressions from teachers, from lecturers, anyone from students, any from the teachers that help me, like student union as well? So any advice for that, and any experience you have from that as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. It's really difficult to
I'm not. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, no, it's really difficult to sort of take a causal kind of approach and say this incident happened and that had a direct impact on my education. For me, I know that's not the case for others. I mean, lots of people I've spoken to will tell you that because of the way they were treated by their by a particular lecturer, or because of the environment in the classroom, that really affected their studies, and they know that they had potential which wasn't met. So that isn't something that I'm not alive to. But I don't, for me personally, and I suspect this is the case for a lot of people, because the way that these things perpetuate themselves are now a lot more subtle and a lot more discreet than perhaps previously. It's really difficult to tell on that individual level whether or not your experience ultimately is leading to you not having the education and the outcomes that you deserve. So it's kind of quite challenging on a personal level. But what I do know is that on a systematic and a structural level, on a systemic, and a structural level, that a lot of these spaces, in higher education and beyond, are they're not creating the sorts of environments that are necessary for students of color to succeed. And I guess in terms of your question, in terms of what can you do about it, for a start, it's not really your job to fix the problem.
Of course.
So I think that's very important, that you don't take that burden on and say, right, I've got to fix this for myself and for everybody else. It's not really your responsibility. And I guess my advice is, if you can get into spaces where you can get agitate and get institutions to really take this more seriously, it's at that kind of structural level that those changes need to be made. Other than doing the things that are required to, really increase, to look after yourself and increase your resilience in those spaces, whether that's through connecting with other people, whether it's through self-care, whether it's through taking breaks, not being too hard on yourself, and understanding, that this is not your fault that certain things are happening. I think that's the key. But if you do have that extra capacity, which not everybody has, and that's fine, but if you do have that time, you do have that extra capacity, really highlighting what the issues are, and investing that time to persuade and encourage institutions or organizations or leaders to act on them, is the stuff that's going to really make the difference. So that can be done in a whole range of ways.
That was very much a very diverse, but also some very insightful kind of choices you have. I really like when you mentioned how you felt institutions like Cambridge, or I guess most unis in the UK actually, aren't really built to support people of color. That was really interesting to actually hear, because when you think about it, really uni wasn't open to anyone who wasn't rich or white or a man, honestly, until very too late, basically, essentially. So it's like, we're not surprised enough that all these institutions that are like really renowned, like Oxford and Cambridge, Oxford, even Edinburgh Uni, they just aren't basically built to support people. And I feel like the issue is sometimes they don't know how to fix that. And so it is a burden for the students who are like, I feel this way, but again, I'm only one person who's studying this, and this. I just don't feel like it's, again, it shouldn't be my job, but even if it was, it's too big a job to take on, essentially. Each day, way you set that up, and it's important for you to like know what you can do. It's you first, so that your mental health is okay, that you're doing well, and then you have the extra energy, the extra time, resources, then go on to really try to implement things. But I definitely appreciate that. I think it makes a lot of sense that people need to be looking at perspectives, because to them, they kind of come in expecting for it to be, oh, I'm a student, this is like how it's going to be, it's going to be great. But then obviously they don't see these invisible hurdles that no one else sees them. So really just, I feel it's important to make sure that you are unfortunately jumping over these hurdles, but making sure that if you can, obviously support other people as well. And trying to make worthwhile changes in the systematic places you're actually in, unfortunately. So that makes complete sense. I think people would like to think that like yourself are now a role model at Cambridge, or I assume. I don't go there, so I assume like you probably set in place where people who are near below you can be like, I want to run one day for student union because I think I'm good at that. I have the energy at the time to actually implement changes that I want, that I've unfortunately had to deal with myself. So that's really, really cool. I really appreciate that. And so question number 3, I think it's more, but this is just thinking of a time where like, not just about the racism at your university, but just in general mental health, where like you realize you have to stop and think, wait, if I was to have had better self-care at this time right now, I handle this better. a time where you really could see your mental health deteriorating and it was linking to your personal development as well. Is there a time you could speak on that, and also how being aware benefited you, but also what you did to implement changes, however, just like taking more walks or sleeping earlier, whatever you do in terms of making sure that you're as good as you can be, basically, for anything that comes your way?
Yeah, yeah, a very good question. I remember very distinctly my first term as SU president, and there was a big shift in lifestyle. I'd gone from being a student surrounded with all my friends and all my networks, having essentially done the same thing for 3 years, understood how it works, to work in the student union where I was still sort of in the same environment, but not quite. All my friends had graduated. I wasn't doing anywhere near the same level of extracurricular activities I was doing before. And I was, my routine had changed, and it was getting into winter. And I just remember coming home every evening after work and just being exhausted and just in a really bad mood all the time. It just took me a really long time to kind of work out what was kind of going on. And a couple of things, just, I changed very, very quickly. Actually, just sort of one thing that made a huge difference was just at 5 o'clock having something to eat. And I realized that, that my routine had changed such that I was just basically having lunch at lunchtime, didn't have time to have anything else. And was kind of powering through and and by the time, 7 or 8 and I was having something, it was far too late. And that was just making me feel awful and really bad. So just being really aware of how your body functions and what you need to get through the day and things like that. It was really having that awareness and self-awareness to step back and go, something's not quite right here, what do we need to do? And that turned out to be the thing in that context, because actually, ironically, I was doing much more exercise than I was doing before, and so I just couldn't quite crack it. But that turned out to be something. And I think taking that time to step back and reflect and go, what's working well, what's not working well, what's your rhythm, what things do you need to kind of function properly, how much sleep do you need to function properly, and the rest of it, when do you need to take breaks, that sort of thing is very important, and it increases your capacity actually to do more.
I totally understand that. That's very, very relatable. I think everyone, when I came to first year, at least of undergraduate, I really was I got to December again. I feel like December time is just assessments, it's darker, you're just really thrown off the kind of fun first semester summertime rhythm that you're in. And so I had the same experience as well, where I was just I was confused. I couldn't understand process why I was feeling so bad. And I think just not taking the time to stop and be just calm down, let's figure out what's wrong. And then obviously we realize that you're having one meal a day and it's at 10 p.m. and going back to work until 4 a.m. And it's just it's so easy to be oh, that's what it is. The non-eating, the non-sleeping, and the general worries are probably what's causing this. Yeah, I think people the pressure of uni makes what's the word? Is sometimes it's the pressure or the understanding of how you feel. So sometimes you're I feel bad, but this essay is due tomorrow. So Sean, and that's hard to of course change, but just making that change, being I feel bad and take a break. Essays will still be done, just later time, is a hard thing to grow into, to develop into. It's a hard practice to start. So lifestyle change is really important, even if it feels like it's counterproductive to what you want to do. Because obviously, what time you spend, I don't know, making that extra meal, that's not like a sandwich from Tesco's or some sort of nutrition bar or anything. It's it adds more than you think, even if it's taking time out of your essay work. So
and I think the one thing I didn't appreciate until years afterwards, actually, I was in a race equity training workshop just so I was on the stream for people of color, and it was a chance to kind of reflect on experiences and things like that. And we started talking about this issue of resilience, and that you've sort of got to be careful the context in which you bring up resilience, because resilience is not the solution to these barriers, but resilience is in a sense, a necessity in certain contexts in order to deal with, structural things that you can't change. And it was only in that session that I realized that whilst I was actually a student, just because of, and I don't think it was deliberate, just because of a series of decisions and choices I'd made, I'd ended up with a fairly good structure, which allowed me to be incredibly resilient during that time. Because I'd look back, if I compare the student union time to when I was a student,
right.
I was able to do a lot more. I had much more capacity to juggle lots of different things. And yet going into one job at student union, I found it much more difficult. And I realized that there were a couple of structural things. So for example, I was in a choir at uni, which meant that I had to stop work at 5 basically every day to go to choir practice. And then that was me taken out for 2.5 hours in a non-working environment, no phones, nothing, just concentrating on, singing and that kind of thing. Then you did the service, and then, you had that time. And I had breakfast, lunch, and dinner at exactly the same day, every day. I was able to pursue lots of different interests. I had my close circle of friends, on my doorstep. I was able to indulge in lots of different musical activities and that kind of thing. And it's only on reflection that you realize that actually there was a setup there which provided structure, which meant that I was able to have good social connections, which meant that I was able to pursue lots of different and varied interests in a very short space of time. And clearly those things meant that I had the resilience to max out when I needed to on that essay or to meet that deadline and that sort of thing. And once I finished uni and graduated, all those other extra things went.
Right. So
and that for me was that moment that I realized, oh, okay, so I didn't have choir to sort of break things up. I was just doing work. I was sometimes missing lunch or having it like in the late afternoon, or it was, I didn't have that social network, a closer circle of friends. I wasn't doing lots of other activities and things like that. So quite a lot of those sort of things, but I was also still in the same place. Yeah. And I think being in the same place made me think that, actually everything was still going to be the same, and it wasn't.
Right.
So.
I think so that's like really, really insightful, because I feel people don't realize how much these like sort of therapeutic activities, hang out with friends, even just literally hang out with friends, just like talking rubbish for hours and hours, or going to choir, just singing. So it's like it feeds into your resilience later on, because you feel like these are times that have like really lifted your spirits, kind of refilled your energy in a way, kind of emotionally is very it's very fulfilling essentially. So when you do kind of not have those things anymore that sort of help you again fueling your resilience, help you kind of create a place, it's a nicer place to in your mind, your soul to kind of work out. When we don't have that, it does impact you a lot, and you don't give them those activities that really help you the kind of like the importance they need, or they don't give them their roses basically, in terms of how they are to your schedule and to the things you do. So yeah, that's a very good point. Hopefully you've found new things that you like, and hopefully you're still in choir somewhere that actually help you to again do the things they did in uni with those structures. But that's a very good point. So yeah, last question is just for you personally, just any notes. So you're currently working at NUS.
NUS.
NUS, and so the projects you work on recently have been sort of like employment disparities between people of color and ethnic groups in higher education. So it was really, really cool. So any current projects now you're working on that you want to talk about that are again important to you, of course, but also how they're going and what you plan to achieve with them.
Yeah, so NUS is a management consulting firm, and we do a range of projects. So everything from basically the clients are public sector bodies. So any challenges that they have, and I end up being put on and roped into really interesting projects in that. I guess one of the projects I'm working on at the moment is particularly interesting in this context, is supporting what's called an integrated care system. So that's a new structure that's being put into place, which has the representation from all the NHS trusts and local councils in a particular region, and they kind of work together on that regional basis. So that's an integrated care system approach, and we're working with one of them across a region in the UK to look at the experiences of BAME communities and BAME staff. And it's an initial piece of work. It's a sort of snapshot of what the situation is now. But that's been really interesting in highlighting lots of these issues, looking at the different communities that exist in that region, the way in which they access and their experiences of health and social care. But also throughout the project as well, us getting a much better understanding of how to actually engage those communities as well.
Right. So it's like it's research-based as well, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the real nuances and sensitivities around consulting particular communities. It's been really challenging as a result of COVID, obviously, to do that. We would have much preferred going down there and meeting people in their contexts, whether that's in and around the mosque, in local churches, or in the community centres and that sort of thing. But in the absence of that, still learning and still have learned a lot about how to engage with those communities, what some of the challenges are, and the real importance of health and social care services having the cultural competence to really understand and engage those communities.
Yeah, like there's a lot of biases medically and clinically about different FDME patients and also staff as well. So making sure that that's like it's getting a firsthand kind of view of that. It's really, really cool. I hope it fruits whatever achievements you hope you use to that and how you implement that in the future. Well, apart from that, that is the questions done. So thank you for your time. And